She was only 18 years old and was forced to marry a 78-year-old duke. One night in 1815, an 18-year-old girl discovers she will be given to a 78-year-old man in exchange for money. Her only choice is between the complete ruin of her family or sacrificing her youth. What would you do? How would you find strength when all seems lost? This story will take you through the corridors of Silvermere Manor, where every tapestry holds secrets, every silence carries deep meaning, and where the improbable happens. From the coldest transaction, the purest of transformations is born. Where are you watching us from right now? Write your city and country in the comments. I love knowing that our stories cross oceans and connect hearts around the world. And if you appreciate narratives that touch the soul, that make us reflect on courage, redemption, and the transformative power of mutual respect, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Every gesture of support allows us to continue bringing these forgotten stories back to life. West Morley, England, spring of 1815. England was celebrating. The Napoleonic Wars had finally ended, and Wellington was hailed as a hero on every corner. But not every family shared in the national joy. Some were sinking in silence, swallowed by vices and debts, invisible to the society that toasted the newly won peace. The rain hammered against the small library's window panes, like impatient fingers demanding entry. Eleanor watched the drops trickle down, tracing random paths on the fogged glass, and thought how her life resembled that, a slide without control, following gravity, unable to choose its own course. The smell of mildew permeated the room. There was no more money for enough firewood, and the March dampness invaded every corner of the house that had once been respectable. The shelves, once filled with leather-bound volumes, now displayed empty spaces like missing teeth. Her father had sold the most valuable books first, philosophy, then poetry, finally history. All that remained were sentimental novels no one would buy, and a few outdated agricultural treatises. Eleanor pulled the frayed shawl over her shoulders. She was 18 and had learned to recognize the signs, the specific creak of the hallway floorboards when her father staggered, the sour smell of cheap brandy preceding his entrance, the tone of voice that oscillated between false joviality and sudden cruelty. He entered without knocking. Richard Hartley had once been a handsome man. Eleanor held hazy memories of a father who lifted her in his arms, who laughed, who seemed as solid as an oak. Now at 47 he was a cruel caricature of himself. His face was swollen and reddish, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly. But it was his eyes that frightened her most that afternoon. They held not the usual drunken haze, but a calculating clarity that made her stomach clench. "Eleanor." He closed the door with studied care. "We need to talk." She didn't answer. She had learned that silence was armor. "I have received an offer, a very generous offer." Richard sat in the armchair that had once belonged to Eleanor's grandfather, and she noticed how the torn upholstery let tufts of stuffing escape. "Lord Henry Ashworth, the Duke of Silvermere, has asked for your hand in marriage." The world tinkled softly like crystal about to shatter. Eleanor knew the name, everyone did. The Ashworth family was ancient and respected, owning land that stretched across 3 counties. But Lord Henry? "He is 78 years old," she whispered. 78 years old and a considerable fortune. Richard leaned forward, and Eleanor instinctively recoiled. "He saw you at the summer ball in London last year. He was impressed by your kindness." She vaguely remembered an elderly lady, Lady Howick, forgotten in a corner of the ballroom, and Eleanor spending an hour talking with her because no one else would. A simple gesture, born of genuine compassion. And someone had been watching. "He is ill, Ellen. He won't live long." Her father's voice was soft now, seductive. "A year, perhaps 2. And then you will be a wealthy young widow, free to choose your own path. And the family?" She forced the words through her tight throat. "What do we gain?" Because she knew, oh how she knew, that this was not about her. It had never been about her. £15,000. Richard didn't have the decency to look ashamed. Enough to pay off all the debts, to restore our position, to give Charlotte and Grace the future they deserve. Her sisters. Charlotte, 12 years old with eyes still full of hope. Grace, only 7, who didn't yet fully understand why they no longer had music lessons, why her winter dress was mended, why their mother cried softly when she thought no one was listening. "Do I have a choice?" Eleanor asked, though she knew the answer. "We all have choices, daughter." Richard stood up, approached her. "You can choose to save this family, or you can choose to see us in the gutter, with your mother doing needlework for a few miserable shillings and your sisters." He left the threat hanging in the damp air. Eleanor closed her eyes. She saw her mother, Sarah, once vibrant, and now just a silent shadow gliding through the halls. She saw Charlotte, whose schoolbooks had been sold. She saw Grace, who didn't understand why she couldn't have new dolls anymore. When? Her voice sounded hollow to her own ears. The wedding will be in 3 weeks. You will move to Silvermere Manor tomorrow. Tomorrow? She opened her eyes, feeling panic rise. But tomorrow. Richard gripped her arm with painful force. And you will be the perfect wife, Eleanor. Grateful, obedient. Because if you ruin this, if your recklessness destroys this arrangement, I swear to God. He raised his hand. And for the first time, Eleanor saw what he was capable of. She saw in his eyes the willingness to use force, to ensure her cooperation at any cost. The slap exploded across her face, like the crack of thunder that had shaken the house seconds before. Eleanor staggered, tasting the metallic tang of blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. Tears burned in her eyes, not from physical pain, but from the final destruction of any illusion about the man who had once been her father. Do you understand? Richard asked calmly, as if discussing the weather. Eleanor nodded, one hand on her throbbing cheek. When he left, she remained motionless, listening to the rain. She thought of running, but where to? A single woman with no money, no connections? She thought of refusing, but then what would happen to her mother, to her sisters? Slowly, Eleanor walked to the window. Outside, through the curtain of rain, she could see the neglected gardens, the rose bushes no one pruned anymore. Spring insisted on arriving, indifferent to human tragedy. The first leaves stubbornly sprouted on the bare branches. Tomorrow, she thought, tomorrow I become a commodity. I will have a price, and that price will be paid. But something deep inside her, something that neither despair nor fear could completely extinguish, whispered a promise. I will not be only what they make of me. I will find a way to be more. The rain continued. Eleanor remained at the window until dusk swallowed the gardens, until there was no difference between the sky and the earth. Everything merged into an indistinct grey. And somewhere many miles away, in a stone manor on the shores of a silver lake, an elderly duke looked out of his study window and thought of kindness, of second chances, and of how sometimes one had to do the unthinkable to create possibilities for redemption. The carriage arrived at precisely 3 o'clock the next afternoon, black and glossy as a raven's wing, with the ducal crest carved on the doors, a lion rampant on a silver field. From her bedroom window, Eleanor watched as 2 footmen in immaculate livery disembarked and opened the door. Her trunk was already packed, a pathetic collection of belongings that fit into a single container. 3 mended dresses, worn undergarments, the few remaining pieces of jewelry, all of sentimental, not monetary value, a book of poetry that had belonged to her grandmother, a miniature of her sister's. It didn't take much to pack up a life that had already been emptied. When Lord Henry Ashworth emerged from the carriage, Eleanor felt her heart tighten, not with romantic fear, but with a grim understanding of reality. He was very, very old, but there was dignity in how he moved, tall, thin as a willow in winter, dressed in understated elegance. His completely white hair was combed back, revealing a face that had once been handsome and was now simply aristocratic. Prominent bones, skin marked by time like ancient parchment, but his eyes were different, grey-blue like a stormy sky, and in them was a vivacity that belied his years. Eleanor descended the stairs. Her mother was in the entryway, hands clasped, her eyes red from a night of crying. Charlotte and Grace had been kept out of sight. Perhaps it was for the best. Her father was there, of course, an oily smile plastered on his face. "My lord," Richard said with an exaggerated bow, "it is an honor to receive you in our humble home." Henry barely glanced at him. His eyes went straight to Eleanor, descending the last steps with her head held high. She wore her best dress, faded blue, high-necked, long-sleeved. Nothing special, but she maintained an erect posture, her shoulders back, because if she was to be sold, she would at least be sold with dignity. "Lady Eleanor." Henry's voice was surprisingly strong, polite, with an upper-class accent polished by decades of privilege. He extended his hand. She took it. His skin was dry, thin as tissue paper, but his grip was firm. "My lord." They sized each other up in silence. Eleanor expected to see lust, expectation, some form of predatory satisfaction in his eyes. Instead, she saw curiosity, assessment, and something that could strangely be respect. "Would you like to speak in private?" Henry asked. "Without witnesses?" Richard started to protest, but Henry raised an imperious hand. "Privacy, Mr. Hartley. I assure you that your financial concerns will be addressed regardless." It was said with absolute politeness, but Eleanor noted the subtle disdain, the way Henry didn't completely hide his revulsion for her father. Something stirred within her, surprise perhaps, relief. They went to the ruined library. Henry walked slowly, using an ebony cane with a silver handle but not as a support, more as an accessory. When the door closed, he got straight to the point. "I imagine you have many questions." Eleanor decided on honesty. After all, what did she have to lose? "Why me?" "Direct, excellent." Henry sat down carefully. "Because last summer, at a ball where everyone was preening like peacocks, you spent an hour with Lady Harwick, who was alone and forgotten. You didn't do it expecting to be seen. You did it because it was the right thing to do. Is that worth £15,000? His eyes twinkled with something that might have been amusement. Uncommon frankness for a young woman being offered as a commodity. "Did your father teach you to dissemble?" "My father taught me that I have nothing left to lose." "Then allow me to offer you something." Henry took a folded document from his inner pocket. "The marriage contract. It was prepared by solicitors in London. It protects your interests in a most unusual way." Eleanor took the paper, began to read. The legal language was dense, but a few points stood out. A generous dowry paid before the wedding. Specific properties designated to her. Substantial annual incomes. Extraordinarily generous provisions for widowhood. "This is," she looked up, "this is far more than expected. I have specific reasons." Henry leaned forward. "Eleanor Hartley, I will be frank because I respect your intelligence. I am dying. Severe heart failure. I have at best a year. This marriage is not about romantic companionship or heirs. It is about ensuring that my personal properties, distinct from the ducal title, are inherited by someone who will use them with wisdom and kindness." The floor seemed to shift beneath Eleanor's feet. "But why not a relative?" "Why not? I have tried. Multiple times I have tried to adopt, to establish heirs. I was blocked at every turn by my late wife's family, by greedy cousins, by archaic laws." There was bitterness in his voice now. "A marriage, however, is unassailable, and if marrying someone who is in desperate need and who has demonstrated genuine character, perhaps I can do one right thing before I die. So I am Charity." There was no judgment in her voice, only understanding. "It is a transaction," Henry corrected, "but it can be a transaction with honor on both sides. You will give me companionship during my final months. You will talk with me, walk with me in the gardens, help manage the estates. In return, you will inherit enough wealth to ensure you never again depend on the cruelty of men like your father." Eleanor looked out the window. A spring wind rustled the trees, carrying the first cherry blossoms like delicate snow. "And if I refuse, then I will order the carriage to leave, and your father will receive only £1,000 for my inconvenience." Henry paused. "But we both know you will not refuse, because I saw it in your eyes when you came down those stairs. You would do anything to protect your mother and sisters." It was true. Eleanor felt tears burning, but she did not let them fall. 3 weeks, she said calmly. 3 weeks until I become your wife. What happens between now and then? You will come to Silvermere Manor today. You will have your own suite of rooms, complete privacy, a suitable lady's companion. You will learn about the estate, meet the people who will serve you. And if at any point you decide you cannot bear this, well, we will cross that bridge if we come to it. Eleanor looked at the document again. The words blurred, but one thing was crystal clear. This man, this dying duke, was offering her not just money but possibility, a future beyond her present nightmare. "When do we leave?" she asked. Henry smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his austere face into something almost warm. "Immediately, if you are ready." "I am." The farewell was swift and painful. Her mother hugged her with desperate force, whispering apologies that Eleanor couldn't process. Charlotte and Grace were brought for a quick kiss, Grace crying without fully understanding, Charlotte with dry, hard eyes, already understanding too much. When the carriage departed, Eleanor did not look back. She kept her eyes fixed ahead toward the unknown, feeling every jolt of the road as a definitive step away from what had been and toward what would be. Lord Henry, sitting across from her, watched her in silence. And if Eleanor had looked, she would have seen in his eyes not triumph, not possession, but something unexpectedly gentle, almost fatherly. Let me do this right, Henry thought. Let this last act be something Caroline would not be ashamed of. The sun began to set as they left West Morley behind, tinting the clouds with pink and gold. And for a moment, just one fleeting moment, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine that perhaps, just perhaps, there might be something beyond survival waiting for her. That fragile hope would be tested in the most unlikely ways in the days to come. The estate revealed itself gradually as the carriage travelled down the long avenue of ancient elms. First, the wrought iron gates with the ducal crest. Then, the formal gardens, even in the twilight, displaying perfect geometry. Beds of tulips in military formation, hedges trimmed with surgical precision, marble fountains where frozen nymphs eternally poured water. And then, emerging from the landscape like a stone ship anchored in a sea of green lawns, Silvermere Manor. Eleanor caught her breath. It was not merely large, it was imposing. Palladian architecture with Gothic touches, 3 stories of cream-colored limestone, arched windows pointing to the sky like fingers in prayer, towers at each corner, a slate roof reflecting the last rays of the sun, and behind it, stretching as far as the eye could see, the lake that gave the estate its name, an expanse of dark silver water dotted with white swans gliding like ghosts. 300 years of history, Lord Henry commented softly, following her gaze. Built by my great-great-grandfather after the Restoration. It survived the Civil War plagues, countless family scandals. It will still be here long after I'm gone. The carriage stopped before the main entrance, where marble steps led to double oak doors carved with hunting scenes. Footmen appeared as if by magic, perfectly synchronized, their faces carefully impassive. But Eleanor caught the furtive glances, the ill-disguised whispers. She knew what they were saying. The new Duchess, a girl, young enough to be his great-granddaughter. What a shame. What a scandal. She lifted her chin, descending from the carriage with all the grace she could muster. If she was to be judged, she would at least be judged as someone who would not bow. The entrance hall was magnificent and intimidating in equal measure. A black and white marble checkerboard floor, a double staircase curving up to the second floor, crystal chandeliers capturing and multiplying the candlelight, Flemish tapestries on the walls depicting mythological scenes. The ceiling was frescoed, Olympian gods observing mortals with eternal indifference. And in the center, waiting with a military posture, was a woman of about 60, tall, slender, dressed in dark grey, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her light brown eyes appraised Eleanor with the precision of a general inspecting troops. Lady Victoria Ashworth, Lord Henry made the introductions. My sister-in-law. Victoria, this is Lady Eleanor Hartley, my fiancée. Victoria gave a minimal curtsy, polite but without warmth. Lady Eleanor, welcome to Silvermere. Her voice was cultured, controlled, revealing absolutely nothing of her thoughts. Lady Victoria. Eleanor returned the curtsy. A tense silence unfolded. Then Victoria gestured to a young maid waiting in the shadows. Martha will show you to your rooms. Dinner will be served at 8. Henry likes punctuality? Of course. Eleanor kept her voice neutral. She followed Martha up the grand staircase, aware that all eyes were on her. The second-floor corridor stretched on endlessly, lined with oak doors, punctuated by high windows that now showed only darkness. Family portraits watched her from the walls, generations of Ashworths with aristocratic noses and haughty expressions. Here, my lady. Martha opened a set of double doors. The suite took her breath away again. A private sitting room decorated in shades of blue and cream, delicate mahogany and satin furniture. A fire already lit in the hearth, filling the room with warmth and the scent of applewood. Through a door on the left, she glimpsed a bedroom with a canopy bed large enough for 4 people. To the right, a dressing room equipped with mirrors and cut-glass bottles. Your trunk is being unpacked, my lady, Martha said, her voice gentle. Hot water will be brought for your bath in half an hour. There is a bell here and here, she indicated burgundy silk cords, to call for assistance. Do you require anything else? No. Thank you, Martha. When she was alone, Eleanor walked slowly through the space. She touched the velvet curtains, tested the softness of the upholstered armchair, examined the books carefully arranged on the shelf. Byron, Wordsworth, Jane, Austen. Someone had chosen them with care. She went to the window. Outside, the gardens merged with the darkness, but she could see the silver lake under the rising moon. It was beautiful. It was unreal. It was a gilded cage. Eleanor rested her forehead against the cold glass, and for the first time since the carriage had left her home, allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had sold herself. She had agreed to become the wife of a man near death in exchange for money for a family that had used her as a bargaining chip. But as silent tears streamed down her face, another part of her, that stubborn part that had refused to break even under her father's slap, whispered, "You are alive. You are here. And as long as you breathe, you can find ways to live with dignity." A soft knock on the door. "Come in." It was a different maid, carrying pitchers of steaming water. "For your bath, my lady. Lady Victoria also asked me to inform you. There will be conversation after dinner. She wishes to establish expectations." Of course she did. Eleanor could perfectly imagine what kind of expectations would be established. The bath was a luxury she hadn't experienced in months. Truly hot water, lavender-scented soap, soft, thick towels. Afterward, she put on the best of her 3 dresses. Forest green with discreet lace at the neckline, inadequate for a ducal dinner, but it was all she had. When she descended at 8 o'clock sharp, guided by a silent footman, she found Henry and Victoria already in the dining room. The room was formidable, an oak table for 30, though only 3 places were set at one end, silverware gleaming under the light of candelabras, porcelain so fine that light shone through it. Dinner was a civilized ordeal. 5 courses served with choreographed precision, minimal and meticulously polite conversation. Victoria asked about her education, limited, her talents, few, her expectations, none she could honestly verbalize. Henry ate little, Eleanor noticed. He pushed food around his plate, sipped red wine, coughed discreetly into a linen napkin. He was tired, deep lines around his eyes, a pallor beneath his aristocratic skin. After dinner, in the blue drawing room, Victoria orchestrated the promised conversation. "Lady Eleanor," she began, sitting as straight as an unsheathed sword, "I understand that the circumstances of this marriage are unusual, but understand this, while you are under this roof, you will represent the Ashworth name. Improper behavior, scandal of any kind will not be tolerated. I understand, Lady Victoria. There are rules. Formal dinners with Henry every evening. He values company during meals. Afternoon tea with me at 4 o'clock. We will use that time to instruct you in appropriate deportment. Mornings will be dedicated to study in the library. Henry insists you learn about the estate. Absolute discretion is expected, especially before the wedding. No correspondence without supervision. No visits to the village without a proper escort." Eleanor listened, feeling the walls close in. "And after the wedding?" she dared to ask. Victoria and Henry exchanged a look. "After the wedding," Henry said softly, "you will be the Duchess of Silvermere. You will have responsibilities commensurate with the title, but also freedoms that we will discuss privately." There was something unsaid there, something that made Victoria purse her lips in disapproval, but she did not elaborate. At 10 o'clock, Eleanor was dismissed. She climbed the stairs, feeling the weight of 200 years of tradition pressing on her shoulders. In her rooms, she found a fine linen nightgown already laid out on the bed, the fire restoked, the curtains drawn. She lay down in the enormous bed, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. She thought of Charlotte and Grace, hoping they were sleeping peacefully. She thought of her mother. She thought of the life she had left behind and the impossible-to-imagine future that stretched before her. But she couldn't sleep. Somewhere in the vastness of Silvermere Manor, a clock chimed the hours, marking the time that separated Eleanor Hartley, the girl she had been, from the Duchess of Silvermere she would be forced to become. And in his rooms on the floor below, Lord Henry Ashworth looked at a portrait of his late wife Caroline and murmured, "I hope you approve, my dear. I hope this is wisdom and not madness." The portrait did not answer, but the moonlight touched the painted face in such a way that it almost seemed to smile. Eleanor awoke to the pale light of early morning seeping through the curtains. For a disoriented moment she didn't know where she was. Then the memory fell like cold water. Silvermere, the wedding, her new life. She rose, dressed without assistance. She would call maids only when necessary. She needed to maintain some sense of independence, and went down for breakfast at 7 as instructed. The breakfast room was empty, except for food laid out in silver warming dishes. Eleanor served herself modestly, toast, jam, tea, and sat near the window overlooking the gardens. Dew covered everything, turning the lawns into a sea of diamonds. She was lost in thought when the door was flung open with enough violence to make her spill her tea. A man burst into the room like a personified storm. Tall, easily over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, wearing riding clothes that suggested he had just arrived. Dark brown hair disheveled by the wind, a thin scar cutting through his left eyebrow, and grey-blue eyes identical to Lord Henry's but burning with a fury the old Duke had never displayed. He stopped upon seeing her, and Eleanor felt the shock of his scrutiny like a physical impact. "You," the word was an accusation. "You're Eleanor Hartley." It wasn't a question. Eleanor rose slowly, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "And you are?" "Dr. Alexander Ashworth." He spat the name as if it were contaminated. "Lord Henry's nephew. Apparently the only member of this family who wasn't informed of this. Obscene business." "Business!" Eleanor repeated the word, feeling a welcome, powerful anger rise. "That is an apt description. At least you don't try to disguise it." Alexander approached, and Eleanor forced herself not to step back. He smelled of horse and road, sweat and leather. "When I received Victoria's letter yesterday, I thought it was some sort of cruel joke. My uncle, a man of honor, of principles, marrying a girl young enough to be his great-granddaughter. I am 18. I am perfectly legal." "Legal?" Alexander laughed, a harsh sound. "Legal is not the same as moral. Tell me, Lady Eleanor, How long did it take you to seduce him? What lies did you tell? What promises did you make? Eleanor's blood boiled. You know nothing about— I know enough. I know that for months you must have been corresponding with him, poisoning his mind against his family, making him believe— He stopped, breathing heavily. My uncle has served this country, this family, for 7 decades. And now, when he is vulnerable and ill, you take advantage— The slap echoed through the room like a pistol shot. Eleanor's hand stung. Alexander's face snapped to the side, a red mark blooming on his fair skin. Absolute silence. Then Alexander turned back slowly, his eyes dangerously narrowed. You dare! Eleanor's voice trembled, but it was with fury, not fear. Have you come in here making accusations, insults, knowing absolutely nothing about me or my situation? You call me a seductress, a manipulator, a liar. And you expect me to stand quietly and take it? You are all of those things. A fortune hunter who— I was sold, Eleanor shouted, and the words echoed through the magnificent room. Sold by a desperate, drunken father to pay off gambling debts. I had never seen Lord Henry before 3 days ago. I never exchanged a single letter, a single word with him. He saw me once at a ball where I showed basic kindness to an old lady. That is the entire basis for this obscene transaction you so despise. Alexander blinked, clearly not expecting that. You expect me to believe— I don't care if you believe me. Eleanor felt tears burning but forced them back. But before you judge me, Dr. Ashworth, consider that maybe, just maybe, I am as much a victim as you imagine your uncle to be. The difference is he chose this. I had no choice at all. She swept past him, heading for the door. Where are you? Anywhere away from you. I'm not finished. I am. Eleanor turned at the door. And for your information, your uncle is not being manipulated. He is dying. Heart failure, in case your medical knowledge serves you for anything. This marriage is his idea, not mine. If you want to blame someone, start with yourself for being so absent that he felt the need to seek companionship from a stranger. She left before he could reply, her heart pounding violently, her hands shaking. Only in the deserted hallway did she allow herself to stop, lean against the wall and breathe. She hated this. She hated being judged, hated being misunderstood, hated the humiliation of having to defend choices she had never truly made. But something else had happened in that confrontation. For the first time since agreeing to the marriage, Eleanor had felt power. Even if it was just the power to talk back, to defend herself, to refuse to be diminished. It was something. It was a start. In the breakfast room, Alexander stood motionless, touching the cheek where the slap still stung. Slowly, he sank heavily into a chair. What had he just done? He had ridden to Silvermere in a fury, ready to save his beloved uncle from an adventuress. He had pictured it all. The young seductress, beautiful and cruel, weaving her spells around a lonely old man. Instead, he had found— what? A frightened girl disguised as a furious woman. Eyes that burned with anger, but also with something dangerously close to despair. A brutal frankness that no dissembler would display. I was sold. The words echoed. Damn it, Alexander whispered to the empty room. Perhaps he had just made a terrible mistake. The 3 weeks before the wedding passed in a strange haze, half dream, half nightmare. Eleanor never saw Alexander again. He had left the same night as their confrontation, leaving only a curt note for Henry about urgent matters in London. The days settled into their own rhythm. Mornings in the library, where Eleanor devoured books on estate management, inheritance laws and financial investments. Henry often joined her, teaching her patiently, treating her not as a child, but as a capable pupil. You have a sharp mind, he commented once, watching her solve a complex accounting problem. You can hardly disguise your pleasure when you master a new concept. Eleanor blushed. I never had the opportunity to study properly. My father considered a woman's education unnecessary. Your father is a fool. Henry closed the ledger. Wasted intelligence is a crime against human potential. Caroline, my late wife, was the most brilliant person I ever knew. She managed this estate better than any steward. You remind me of her, you know. I do. Eleanor was genuinely surprised. The way you face a challenge, not with fear, but with a healthy respect for its complexity. He paused. Caroline would have liked you. It was moments like these that confused Eleanor. Henry was not a monster. He was not a predator. He was an old, tired, deeply lonely man trying to do something right in a convoluted way. The afternoons with Lady Victoria were less pleasant but educational in another way. Henry's sister-in-law taught etiquette relentlessly, which fork to use, how to sit, how to converse without saying anything of substance, how to descend stairs without tripping on voluminous skirts. You will be watched constantly, Victoria warned. Society will be waiting for you to stumble. Do not give them the satisfaction. Why are you helping? Eleanor asked one afternoon. You clearly disapprove of this marriage. Victoria paused in the act of pouring tea. I disapprove of the situation. I do not disapprove of you. She met Eleanor's eyes. Henry is doing what he considers noble, saving a young woman from terrible circumstances, if he must do it through marriage. Well, I can at least ensure you are not torn to shreds by society in the process. It was, Eleanor realized, a strange form of kindness. The dinners with Henry became moments she almost looked forward to. He told stories of his youth, of the Napoleonic Wars where he had lost friends, of how he met Caroline, a picnic where she corrected his political analysis, and he fell instantly in love. 40 years, he said one night, his voice distant. 40 years of a happy marriage. When she died, a part of me died too. I wandered for 7 years, waiting to be reunited with her. He looked at Eleanor. And then I saw you at that ball, being kind with no audience, no expected reward. And I thought, perhaps I can do one last good thing before I go. Eleanor didn't know how to respond, so she just reached across the table, briefly touching his hand. Henry smiled, a sad but genuine smile. You will do something remarkable with this life, Eleanor Hartley. I am sure of it. June 15, 1815 arrived under stubbornly grey skies, as if time itself disapproved. The ceremony was to be held in St. Michael's Chapel on the estate, a small, intimate, 400-year-old stone building. Only 20 guests were invited. Eleanor had expected her family, but a letter had arrived 3 days prior. Her father had taken the advance money and fled to London, taking the family with him. They would not be attending. Eleanor read her mother's letter, full of apologies, explanations, pleas for forgiveness, and felt something harden inside her. Very well, she would do this alone. Lady Victoria helped her dress. The gown was simple but exquisite, ivory-coloured silk, empire waist, long sleeves, delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. No jewellery except for simple pearls. Her hair was pinned in a loose bun with a few curls framing her face. You look beautiful, Victoria said, and for the first time she sounded genuinely warm. Henry will be. Well, as close to impressed as old men get. The walk to the chapel was short, but seemed to last an eternity. Guests, mostly distant family, neighbours socially obligated to attend, whispered as Eleanor entered. She kept her head high, her eyes fixed on the altar. Henry was waiting there, formally dressed, leaning on his cane. When he saw Eleanor, something passed across his face. Not desire, but something softer. Approval, perhaps. Sadness, too, for all that the moment represented. The vicar conducted the ceremony with uncomfortable efficiency. The words sounded hollow. To have and to hold. I do not have you. You do not have me. We are legal agreements in human form. In sickness and in health. You are sick. I am the cure or the poison. I don't know which. Till death do us part. Death is already here, waiting in the gardens, patient. When the time came, Henry placed a gold ring on her finger. Simple, unadorned, heavy. Eleanor did the same, her hands trembling slightly. I now pronounce you husband and wife. No kiss. Henry just took her hand, squeezed it gently. The wedding breakfast at Silvermere was a tense affair. Polite conversations, false congratulations, speculative glances. Eleanor sat at the head table next to Henry, smiling until her jaw ached, answering banal questions with banal answers. Across the hall, almost hidden in an alcove, she saw a familiar figure, Alexander. He had come, not for the ceremony, he arrived afterward, but he was here now, formally dressed, hair combed back, his expression carefully neutral. When his eyes met Eleanor's, he didn't look away. He just watched her with something that could be assessment or perhaps regret. Eleanor looked away first. When the guests finally departed, Eleanor felt exhausted to her bones. Victoria took her back to her rooms, now officially the Duchess's suite. Rest, Victoria instructed. Henry has asked you to dine with him at 8, privately in his rooms, sir. Eleanor's stomach clenched with apprehension. His rooms? Victoria read her expression, and something like sympathy crossed her usually stern face. Henry is not a monster, child. Trust in that, if in nothing else. At 8 o'clock sharp, Eleanor knocked on the door of the ducal suite. The hallway was silent, candles casting dancing shadows. Her heart beat irregularly. Come in. The Armes rooms were masculine and comfortable. Dark leather furniture, shelves overflowing with books, a crackling fire. Henry was sitting in an armchair near the fire, 2 crystal glasses and a bottle of brandy on the side table. Ah, Eleanor, Duchess of Silvermere. He smiled slightly. I'll never get used to how that title sounds applied to you. Please, sit. She sat in the opposite armchair, accepting the glass of brandy he offered. The amber liquid burned on its way down, but it brought a welcome warmth. I imagine you are apprehensive, Henry said calmly. About tonight. About expectations. Eleanor couldn't answer. Allow me to allay your fears immediately. Henry leaned forward, his eyes serious. This marriage is entirely nominal. I will never touch you intimately. We will not share a bed. You will keep your rooms. I will keep mine. The relief was so intense that Eleanor felt dizzy. But then why? Why marry instead of simply adopting? Henry sipped his brandy slowly. I tried, my dear. For years I tried. And then he told her everything. The adoption. Attempts blocked by Caroline's family, who saw any non-blood heir as an insult to her memory. The greedy cousins who contested every legal move. The archaic laws that favored blood kinship above all else. My title, Duke of Silvermere, is entailed to the estate. It will pass automatically to Alexander, my nephew, the closest male heir. I cannot change that. Henry gestured around the room. But this, my personal fortune, £200,000 in funds, manors in Derbyshire and London, investments, jewels not entailed to the title, all of this I can leave to whomever I wish. And you wish to leave it to me? Yes, because I saw genuine kindness in you, because you see need where others see inconvenience, because given the chance, you will do good with this wealth. Eleanor absorbed this slowly. There is more, Henry continued. A will is being meticulously prepared. Extensive medical documentation from multiple independent physicians attesting to my sanity. 47 witnesses to my competence over the last 2 years. Because there will be challenges, Eleanor. My family will try to break the will. And you want me to be prepared. I want you to be ironclad. Henry refilled their glasses. That is why we have the morning lessons. Estate management, finances, laws. That is why Victoria is training you relentlessly in social deportment. When I'm gone, you will need to defend your position alone. For how long? Eleanor asked softly. How long do the doctors give you? 10 to 12 months. Perhaps less. There was no self-pity in his voice, only pragmatism. I intend to use every day teaching you everything you might need. And in return, you will give me company. Conversation. A reason to wake up in the morning besides waiting for the end. It was, Eleanor understood, an extraordinarily honest agreement. You have given me a life, she said quietly. A life beyond the ruin I was facing. That is a greater gift than any amount of money. You have given me purpose, Henry replied. For the last 7 years I have merely existed. With you here, I have a reason to live my final months fully. Believe me, my dear, you have given me an equally valuable gift. They toasted in silence. Two unlikely souls joined by necessity, but finding something unexpectedly close to mutual respect. When Eleanor finally returned to her rooms near midnight, she lay in the enormous bed as a married but untouched woman, a duchess but not a lover, and for the first time in weeks, she slept soundly. In the hallway outside, Alexander stood in the shadows, having overheard part of the conversation through the poorly closed door. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions. He had been so wrong about everything. Summer unfolded at Silvermere with a golden slowness. June turned into July, July into August, and with each passing day, Eleanor felt less like an imposter and more like a part of the fabric of the house. Her mornings followed an established ritual. She would wake at 6, when the light was still a pale pearl and dew covered the gardens like a bridal veil. She walked alone through the geometric flower beds, smelling the roses that bloomed in profusion, listening to the song of thrushes, feeling the world awaken. At 9, she would meet Henry in the library. He taught her with infinite patience how to read ledgers, how to evaluate investments, how to negotiate with tenants while maintaining mutual dignity. Eleanor absorbed it all like thirsty earth absorbing rain. You were born for this, Henry commented one morning, watching her mentally calculate annual incomes. Management requires as much heart as it does head. Many have the intelligence but not the empathy. You possess both. Was Caroline like that? Eleanor asked. Henry smiled, that distant smile that always appeared when he mentioned his wife. Caroline would have managed half of England if given the chance, but society did not permit it. So she channeled it all into Silvermere, into charity, into making small but significant differences. You will do the same, I believe. But you will have resources she did not. Afternoons were for Victoria. Henry's sister-in-law maintained merciless standards, perfect posture, appropriate conversation, impeccable household management. But Eleanor began to perceive a genuine affection beneath the severity. You learn quickly. Victoria admitted one afternoon, after Eleanor managed a minor dispute between maids with surprising tact. You have a natural instinct for justice. It will serve you well as Duchess. The dinners with Henry became moments Eleanor truly cherished. They talked about books, politics, philosophy. Henry treated her opinions with seriousness, debated with her as an equal, gently corrected her when she erred but praised her generously when she was right. You make me feel young again, he said one night, as if ideas still matter, as if there is a future to shape. There is a future, Eleanor replied. It's just not yours. It's mine. And you are giving me the tools to shape it. Henry took her hand across the table, a fatherly, not romantic gesture. The daughter I never had, he murmured. That is what you are to me now. Alexander returned in August, under an oppressive heat that turned the gardens into a sleepy, vibrant landscape. Eleanor was in the conservatory when he arrived, checking on rare orchids that Henry cultivated personally. She felt him before she saw him. A change in the quality of the air, a presence at the entrance. She turned slowly. He was different, still tall, still imposing, but the fury that had consumed him in June had been replaced by something more restrained, cautious perhaps, almost regretful. Lady Eleanor, he said formally. Duchess of Silvermere, Dr. Ashworth. A tense silence stretched between them like a steel wire. I've come to examine Henry, Alexander finally said. Monthly examinations are necessary given his condition. Of course. He is in the library. Alexander didn't move immediately. His eyes, so similar to Henry's but more tempestuous, studied her. I owe you an apology, he said abruptly, for what I said in June, how I said it. I was wrong. Eleanor had not expected this. She assessed him carefully. Why the change of heart? I observed. I spoke with Victoria, with the servants, with the tenants. They all speak of you with respect, admiration even. That is not the reaction a manipulator would provoke. Perhaps I am an extraordinarily skilled manipulator, Eleanor suggested, her voice dry. A muscle jumped in his jaw. Then, surprisingly, he smiled. Just a brief quirk of his lips, but genuine. Perhaps you are. But I believe you are not. Your belief changes nothing. No. He paused. But I would like to start again, without accusations, without anger. We are family now, strangely enough. Eleanor considered. There was sincerity in his eyes, but also reservation. He still didn't fully trust her. Perhaps he never would. But he was offering a truce. A truce, then, she agreed. But not friendship. Not yet. Not yet, Alexander repeated. That's enough. In the following months, Alexander visited monthly, always for 2 or 3 days. He conducted thorough examinations of Henry, adjusted his medications, digitalis for his heart, occasional bloodletting to relieve pressure, and consulted with Eleanor about his symptoms between visits. It was during one of these consultations that Eleanor truly saw Alexander for the first time, not as an antagonist, but as a dedicated physician. He examined Henry with unexpected gentleness, touching his uncle's wrist with reverence, listening to his heart with absolute attention, asking detailed questions about pain, fatigue, and appetite. You keep an excellent record, Alexander commented, examining the journal where Eleanor noted Henry's medications. Detailed, meticulous, better than most physicians I know. Henry matters to me, Eleanor said simply. Alexander looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression changed. Surprise, perhaps. Recognition. You love him, it wasn't a question. Not romantically, but genuinely. He saved me, Eleanor replied. Not just financially. He saved who I could be. How could I not love him? A different kind of silence fell between them, not hostile but charged with new understanding. The Napoleonic Wars, Alexander said abruptly. I served as a surgeon in the Peninsular campaigns, 1811 to 1814. I saw men die by the dozen daily. I learned that life is fragile, that death respects neither rank nor wealth. When I returned and learned of Henry's diagnosis, he paused, swallowed. I thought he still had years. Then your letter arrived, speaking of marriage, and I thought, well, you know what I thought, that I was a vulture preying on a dying man. Yes, he met her eyes. I was protecting him. In the wrong way, but my intentions were good, Eleanor suggested. Perhaps just less terrible than I initially imagined. Eleanor almost smiled. Almost. Henry, watching the interaction from across the room, allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. His pupil and his heir were no longer enemies. They were not yet friends, but a seed had been planted. Let time do its work, he thought. Let them get to know each other without expectations. And then... But he didn't finish the thought. Even in his own mind, it seemed too arrogant to hope that two such different people could find anything beyond mutual tolerance. Still, a man on the verge of death was entitled to small hopes. August brought a suffocating heat that turned Silvermere into a greenhouse. The air hung over the gardens like a wet blanket, and not even the lake offered relief. Its surface mirrored the hot, white sky without a ripple. Henry insisted on his morning walk despite Eleanor's objections. "I will not die suffocated indoors," he declared with a stubbornness she had learned was futile to contest. They went to the rose garden, the oldest part of the estate, planted by Henry's great-grandmother in the previous century. The flowers bloomed in an excessive profusion, their scent so intense it was dizzying. Eleanor settled Henry on a stone bench under an ancient elm and sat beside him with a volume of Wordsworth. "I heard, and looking round I saw," she read softly, "a man who Henry made a strangled sound, half a groan, half a choked cry." The colour drained from his face, turning it ashen grey. His hand flew to his chest, fingers clawing, his eyes wide with primal terror. "Henry!" Eleanor dropped the book, grabbing him as he lurched forward. "Henry, what?" He couldn't speak. He only gasped, each breath a monumental effort. His entire body trembled. Eleanor screamed, a sharp, desperate cry that cut through the silent garden like a blade. "Help! Someone! Help!" Gardeners came running. Footmen materialized from nowhere. Together they carried Henry. So light now, Eleanor noted with horror, just skin stretched over bones. Back to the manor, to his rooms. "Fetch Dr. Ashworth," Eleanor ordered, her voice surprisingly steady despite the panic pulsing through her veins. "Send the fastest rider. Tell him it's urgent. The Duke has collapsed." Victoria appeared, her face pale but controlled. "What happened?" "His heart," Eleanor replied, still holding Henry's hand as he was laid on the bed. "A heart attack it must be. He can't breathe properly." The next 30 minutes were an eternity. Eleanor stayed by Henry's side, dabbing his forehead with a cool cloth, whispering reassurances that sounded hollow even to her own ears. He was conscious, just barely, his glazed eyes fixed on her as if she were an anchor, keeping him from drifting into darkness. "Hold on," she murmured. "Alexander is coming. Just hold on." Then she heard it, the thunder of hooves, shouts, the gate swinging open. Heavy footsteps taking the stairs 2 at a time. Alexander burst into the room like a hurricane, his hair disheveled, still in his consulting clothes, his medical bag banging against his leg. He took in the scene at a glance and went straight to the bed. "How long ago?" His voice was all professional now, doctor, not nephew. 40 minutes, perhaps. "Symptoms?" "Chest pain, can't breathe properly, grey skin, tremors." Alexander was already opening his bag, pulling out a stethoscope, vials of medicine. He listened to Henry's heart, his face growing graver. "Acute heart failure." "The heart is failing, it can't pump blood efficiently." He looked at Eleanor. "I need boiled water, clean cloths, basins, and you. Can you handle this?" "I can." What followed were 14 hours that would be etched into Eleanor's memory like scars. She and Alexander worked in perfect sync, a partnership born of urgent necessity. Alexander administered carefully measured drops of digitalis. Too little would have no effect. Too much would kill. Eleanor held basins while he performed a controlled bloodletting, relieving pressure on the stressed heart. She prepared cold compresses to bring down the rising fever. He constantly monitored the pulse, counting beats, frowning at irregularities. Eleanor did not flinch. When blood spurted, she did not look away. When Henry groaned in pain, she held his hand firmly. When Alexander needed an instrument, she anticipated him and was already holding it out. "You have steady hands," Alexander observed at some point in the dead of night, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Most people would have fainted by now." "I can't faint," Eleanor replied simply. "He needs me." Something passed through Alexander's eyes, reluctant respect turning into genuine admiration. At 3 in the morning, the worst was over. Henry was asleep, not unconscious but exhausted beyond measure, medicated enough to rest. His breathing was still labored but regular. His pulse was weak but steady. Alexander sank into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. Eleanor remained by the bed, still holding Henry's hand. "Will he live?" she whispered. "For now." "But this," Alexander gestured helplessly. This was severe, very severe. The next attack could be the last. A heavy silence fell. Only the ticking of the clock, the low crackle of the fire, Henry's labored breathing. "You were extraordinary," Alexander said quietly. "Most women, hell, most men would have panicked. You kept your head." "I was terrified," Eleanor admitted, finally feeling the post-adrenaline tremors begin. "But you didn't show it. You remained functional. That's an important distinction." She finally looked at him. Alexander looked wrecked, hair on end, bloodstains on his clothes, deep circles under his red eyes. But there was something different in the way he looked at her now. Not hostility, not suspicion, partnership. He's not just a financial transaction to you, Alexander said. It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. He never was. From our first real conversation, he was more a teacher, a friend. The father figure my own father never was. Tears finally came, silent, trickling down her exhausted cheeks. I know we only have months, but I'm not ready to lose him. Alexander stood up slowly, came closer. For a moment he hesitated. Then gently he placed a hand on her shoulder. A simple human comfort. He's lucky, he said softly, to have you. Eleanor covered his hand with hers just for a moment. An understanding passed between them, unspoken but absolute. When the sun rose, it found them still there. Eleanor sitting by the bed, Alexander in the nearby chair, both vigilant, both exhausted, both united by something neither of them would name yet. Henry opened his eyes as the golden light touched his face. He saw Eleanor first, then Alexander. "My two treasures," he whispered, his voice as fragile as a butterfly's wing. "Working together. I knew you could." And then, surprisingly, he smiled before drifting back to sleep. Eleanor and Alexander exchanged a look. Something had irrevocably changed that night, but neither of them was ready to examine exactly what it was. Henry recovered slowly, but the crisis had left a permanent mark. He no longer walked in the gardens. The most he could manage was to sit by the window, looking at the roses he could no longer touch. His movements became deliberately slow, as if any quick action might shatter something fragile within him. Eleanor adapted. She brought the gardens inside, vases of fresh flowers daily, detailed descriptions of each new bud, every bird sighted. She read to him for hours on end. She continued their lessons now in his room, both of them sitting near the fire even in the still warm September. Alexander remained at Silvermere. He didn't mention leaving, and no one suggested he should. He set up a temporary practice in the East Wing, seeing tenants for free twice a week, but his primary focus was Henry, and though he wouldn't admit it yet, Eleanor. He watched her, not furtively but with a growing open interest. The way she managed the household with quiet efficiency, the way she treated the servants with genuine respect, not benevolent condescension, the way her discussions with Henry about estate management revealed a sharp and curious mind. "You would make an excellent physician," he commented one afternoon, finding her in the library studying one of his anatomy books. Eleanor looked up, surprised. "Women can't be physicians. Not officially. But I knew nurses during the war who had more knowledge and skill than most of the barber surgeons. Prejudice is not the same as inability. You believe women should be able to study medicine. I believe wasting talent because of gender is stupidity." He sat in the opposite armchair. "You saved Henry's life that night as much as I did. Your observations, your calm under pressure, your steady hands. Those are qualities no medical school can teach. You were born with them." Eleanor didn't know how to respond. No one had ever validated her intellectual capabilities in this way. "I thank you for saying," she finally. "It's the truth. Not empty courtesy." Alexander paused, something flickering across his face. "I need to apologize again, not just for what I said in June, but for what I thought. You are extraordinary, Eleanor. Forgive me for being too blind to see it at first." Before Eleanor could reply, hurried footsteps echoed in the hall. Victoria appeared at the entrance, her face unusually disturbed. "Lord Pemberton has arrived," she announced, "with a solicitor. They are demanding to see Henry immediately." Eleanor's stomach tightened. She knew that name. Henry had mentioned him. A cousin in his 50s, who had always hoped Henry would die without heirs, so he could inherit a share of the personal fortune. "Henry is sleeping," Alexander said, rising, "and he is not to be disturbed." I tried to explain. Pemberton was insistent. Victoria almost spat the word. They went downstairs together. In the entrance hall, a portly man in expensive but tasteless clothes was pacing impatiently. At his side, a thin, oily figure carried a leather briefcase, clearly the solicitor. Lord Pemberton turned as they descended the stairs. His eyes swept over Eleanor with a disdain he made no attempt to hide. "So this is the famous new Duchess," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "What a convenient bargain you struck, Lady Eleanor. Or should I say, Lady Hartley. I doubt you have any real right to the title." Eleanor felt her blood boil but kept her voice calm. "Lord Pemberton, I presume. Henry has spoken of you." "I'm sure he has." Pemberton strode closer, clearly trying to intimidate her with his bulk. "I've come to see my cousin. I heard about his recent health episode. As a concerned relative, I have a right to ensure he is being properly cared for." "Henry is being cared for by a qualified physician," Alexander intervened, stepping between Pemberton and Eleanor. "And he is resting. Visitors are not appropriate. You must be Dr. Ashworth. How convenient for you to be living here now." Looking after your inheritance, no doubt. Pemberton smirked, an unpleasant expression. But my concern is not with you. It is with certain arrangements. Henry may have made under undue influence. The solicitor stepped forward, clearing his throat. I am Wickham of Wickham and Associates, London. I have been retained by Lord Pemberton to investigate the mental competence of Henry Ashworth, Duke of Silvermere, and to challenge any will prepared under coercion or the improper influence of third parties. The silence that followed was glacial. Are you accusing... Eleanor began, but Alexander placed a warning hand on her arm. Are you accusing my uncle of senility? Alexander asked, his voice dangerously low. A man who managed complex estates until a few weeks ago? Who maintains a political correspondence with members of Parliament? Whose mind is as sharp as it ever was? Her sharp mind doesn't marry a strumpet young enough to be his great-granddaughter, Pemberton retorted. Unless that mind is being manipulated. It all happened very fast. Alexander moved like a striking snake, grabbing Pemberton by the collar and shoving him against the nearest wall. The impact made a portrait of an Ashworth ancestor tremble. Listen carefully, Alexander snarled, his face inches from Pemberton's. You will not come into this house and insult the Duchess of Silvermere, my aunt by marriage, a member of this family, and expect me to allow it. Alexander, Victoria warned, but her voice carried approval. Any attack on Lady Eleanor, Alexander continued, is an attack on this entire family, and if you or your cut-rate solicitor try to contest a dying man's wishes based on malicious speculation, I will ensure that the Ashworth family uses every resource, every connection, every pound of influence to destroy you legally. Is that understood? Pemberton, his face red, nodded stiffly. Alexander released him, stepping back. But when he spoke again, his voice was pure ice. Now get off this property, and do not return without a formal invitation. Pemberton adjusted his clothes with wounded dignity, gesturing to the solicitor. But as he passed Eleanor, he couldn't resist whispering loudly enough for all to hear. Enjoy it while it lasts, you whore. When he's dead, I'll make sure you get nothing. They departed in their carriage with the same dramatic flair with which they had arrived. Silence fell over the hall. Then Victoria surprisingly began to laugh, a low, genuinely amused sound. Well, she said, that was unexpected and deeply satisfying. Eleanor was trembling, not with fear, but with rage and something else. Shock, perhaps, that Alexander had defended her so fiercely and publicly. You didn't have to, she began. I did, Alexander cut her off, turning to face her. You are family. Family protects its own. Something passed between them, something electric, charged, impossible to name. He will try again, Eleanor said calmly, to contest the will. Pemberton is not the type to give up. Let him try. Alexander was calm now, the analytical physician returning. Henry prepared for this meticulously. Extensive medical documentation from multiple independent physicians. Witnesses to his mental competence. The will is challenge-proof. Nothing is completely challenge-proof, Victoria observed pragmatically, but it's as close as humanly possible. And now that Alexander has publicly defended you, Eleanor, society will understand that you have the family's support. Eleanor processed this. In a few short weeks, she had gone from intruder to someone the ducal heir would physically defend. As she went upstairs to check on Henry, still sleeping, thank God, unaware of the confrontation, she sat by the window and looked out at the gardens. A choice was being made without her actively choosing. She and Alexander were being pushed together by circumstance, by common enemies, by Henry silently orchestrating even from his convalescent bed. And the frightening part? She wasn't entirely sure she minded. September brought the first hint of autumn mist, silver veils curling through the gardens of Silvermere at dawn. Eleanor began walking even earlier, at 5:30 when the world was suspended between night and day, when she could think without interruption. But she found she was no longer alone. Alexander had started joining her, appearing silently from the shadows of the terrace, falling into step beside her without a word needed. They walked through the mist like ghosts, their breath visible in the cool air, only the crunch of gravel under their feet. It was during one of these walks that Alexander finally spoke of the war. The Iberian Peninsula, he began abruptly, his eyes fixed ahead. 1811 to 1814. I was 28 when I went. I thought I would save lives, practice noble medicine. Instead, I learned to amputate a limb in under 5 minutes, to decide who would live and who would die because there wasn't time or resources for everyone. Eleanor walked in silence, sensing he needed to say this. Men died screaming for their mothers. Boys, some 16, 17 years old, went into shock and never came out. Infection killed more than bullets. And at the end, when Wellington triumphed and everyone celebrated, I just felt empty, as if I'd left an essential part of myself buried in foreign soil. "Why are you telling me this?" Eleanor asked softly. "Because when we almost lost Henry that night, for the first time since I came back, I felt something other than emptiness. Fear, yes, desperation, but also purpose, and you were there, not panicking, just being strong. And I realized I wasn't alone anymore." He stopped, turned to face her. The mist enveloped them, isolated them, created a private bubble in the world. "You made me feel again, Eleanor. I don't know if that's a gift or a curse." Eleanor didn't know what to say. Instead, she did something instinctive. She reached out, briefly touched his hand. Just a simple human contact, a shared acknowledgement that they had survived something together. Alexander looked down at their joined hands, something intense passing over his face. Then slowly he laced his fingers through hers. They stood like that as the sun began to break through the mist, painting everything in rose and gold. The following weeks established a new rhythm. Eleanor and Alexander worked in partnership managing Silvermere, while Henry slowly regained his strength. Together they inspected tenants' cottages, identifying necessary repairs. Together they reviewed ledgers, planning investments, and they discovered they worked extraordinarily well together. "You're right," Alexander admitted one afternoon, reviewing her financial analysis. "Investing in farm machinery will increase productivity by 30%. I hadn't thought of that. And you're right," Eleanor countered, "that we need to improve the drainage system before winter. Your medical knowledge of sanitation makes a difference." Henry watched their discussions with growing satisfaction. One afternoon, when Eleanor brought his tea, he remarked, "You two are formidable together, complementary. You have empathy and broad vision. Alexander has precision and technical knowledge. Silvermere will thrive under your joint administration." "Henry," Eleanor said carefully, "what are you planning?" He smiled, that knowing smile of someone who knows more than he shares. "Just observing possibilities, my dear. Just observing." In mid-October, Alexander asked Eleanor to accompany him to the weekly medical clinic. She hesitated. Ladies did not participate in medical consultations, but curiosity won. What she witnessed transformed something inside her. Alexander with the tenants was completely different from Alexander with the aristocracy, gentle with frightened children, patient with confused elders, respectful of hesitant women. He treated everyone with equal dignity, regardless of their social status. Eleanor found herself helping instinctively. She calmed children while Alexander examined them. She held women's hands during painful procedures. She organized medicines, kept records. "You're a natural at this," Alexander said at the end of the day, watching her clean the room efficiently. "I like to feel useful, to make a tangible difference." "You do." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Eleanor, there's a school in London that trains nurses. Not officially, but if you wanted to after Henry, you could study there. Use your skills properly." Eleanor looked at him, surprised for the second time. "You would advocate for that? A duchess working as a nurse?" "I would advocate for you doing whatever makes you happy and uses your talents. Social position shouldn't be a prison." Something changed in Eleanor's eyes. Not love yet, but the beginning of it. Her deep admiration for a man who saw her not as an ornament, but as a person capable of her own agency. The conversation happened near the end of October, after a particularly pleasant dinner, where the three of them had laughed genuinely at one of Henry's anecdotes about his misspent youth. Henry asked Alexander to stay after Eleanor had retired. When they were alone with cigars and brandy between them, the old Duke got straight to the point. "You love her." Alexander almost dropped his glass. "Uncle Henry, don't deny it. I've watched you both for months. The way you look at her when you think no one is noticing, how you find reasons to be near her, how you defend her every opinion in your discussions." Alexander sank into his chair, running a hand through his hair. "This was your plan all along, wasn't it? Not just to save her, but to—" "You need someone strong," Henry said calmly. "Someone who isn't intimidated by your intelligence or your occasional arrogance. Someone who understands pain because she has lived through her own. Eleanor is all of those things. And her, is she just a pawn in your chess game? She needs someone who respects her, who values her mind as much as anything else. Someone who sees her as an equal. You are that someone, Alexander. You're manipulating us both." "I am creating an opportunity," Henry corrected. "If there are no genuine feelings, nothing will happen. But if there are—" He let the implication hang in the air. Alexander sat in silence for a long time. "She is extraordinary," he finally admitted quietly. "Intelligent, brave, compassionate. When I saw her that first morning in June, I was blind with fury. Now, Now I can't imagine Silvermere without her. I can't imagine my life without her. So when I am gone— No, Alexander cut him off. Not while you live. It would be a betrayal to you, to her. It doesn't matter what I feel. Henry smiled, sad but proud. Honor. That's why Caroline would have loved you too. He paused. But Alexander, when my time comes, and it will, we both know it, do not waste this opportunity out of misplaced guilt. I will be gone to be with Caroline. You two will have a whole life ahead of you. Promise me you will consider it. Reluctantly, Alexander nodded. I will consider it, but I promise nothing more. It's enough. Eleanor, standing in the hall outside, had not heard the entire conversation, but she had heard enough. Her heart beating irregularly, she returned silently to her rooms. She lay in bed, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling, processing. Alexander loved her. Henry had orchestrated everything from the beginning. And she— What did she feel? Respect, certainly. Admiration for his skills, his compassion. Gratitude for the defense he had offered. And when he smiled, those rare smiles that transformed his serious face, something inside her warmed. But love, she wasn't. Sure, she had never been in love before. She didn't know what it felt like. She only knew that Alexander's presence had made Silvermere feel less like a gilded cage and more like a home. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something that could grow, if time allowed. If Henry lived long enough to see them find their way, and if she could learn to trust the new and frightening feelings that were beginning to blossom in her heart she had thought was frozen forever. The end of October brought the first frost. Eleanor woke one morning to find the gardens transformed, every leaf, every branch outlined in ice crystals, the whole world looking as if it were made of delicate glass. Henry insisted on being taken to the window to see. He sat wrapped in blankets, his breath a faint mist, his eyes taking in the wintry beauty with the intensity of someone who knows it might be their last time. Caroline loved mornings like this, he murmured. She said it was as if God had wrapped the world in tissue paper as a gift. Eleanor sat beside him, took his hand. It was so thin now, the translucent skin revealing every vein, every tendon. Tell me about her, she asked softly. About how you met. Henry smiled, his eyes growing distant with memory. I was 23. She was 20, a country picnic hosted by her family. I was being presumptuous, pontificating on politics with the certainty only youth allows. Caroline listened for 5 minutes, then interrupted and systematically dismantled every argument I had made. He chuckled softly, then coughed. I was stunned, mortified but stunned. No one had ever challenged me like that. I asked to court her that very evening. She said she needed to think about it. She wasn't going to accept just because I was a duke. She made me work for a full 6 months before she agreed to marry me. 40 years, Eleanor whispered. 40 years of happiness. Not every day was happy, Henry corrected. We had arguments, disagreements, but even on the worst days I never doubted that she was my partner, my equal, my better half. He turned to Eleanor, his eyes suddenly and alarmingly lucid. That is what I want for you. Not a marriage of convenience, not a transaction, but a true partnership with someone who sees who you really are. Henry, Alexander, he said simply. Don't pretend you don't know. I've seen how you look at each other. Eleanor blushed, unable to deny it. You are still alive. It would be improper. It would be practical, Henry interrupted gently. My dear Eleanor, I have perhaps days, not weeks. Do not waste time on performative mourning when you could be building a future. I can't think about the future when the present is— She couldn't finish. When the present is slipping away? Henry squeezed her hand weakly. But it is precisely because it is slipping away that you must think of the future. You are 18. You have your whole life ahead of you. Do not waste it on unnecessary guilt. Alexander was summoned 3 days later. Henry's condition had deteriorated abruptly during the night. Labored breathing, irregular pulse, periods of confusion. Is this the end? Eleanor asked when Alexander emerged from his examination. Days, a week, perhaps. His voice was professional, but his eyes betrayed his pain. The heart is failing irreversibly. I can make him comfortable, but I cannot save him. They sat together in the hallway, their shoulders touching, united in anticipation of the coming grief. He gave me everything, Eleanor whispered. A future, a purpose, a sense of self-worth. How do I ever thank him properly? By living well, Alexander answered. By using what he gave you to make a difference. That's what he wants most. They spent the next few days in a constant vigil. Henry drifted in and out of consciousness. Moments of lucidity were sporadic, precious as jewels. In one of those moments, he called them both closer. My treasures, he whispered, his voice barely a breath. My two most precious treasures. He took both their hands, joining them with a strength surprising for one so frail. "Eleanor," his voice was a silken thread, "you gave me joy when I thought there was none left. You made me remember why life is worth living. I was not your biological father, but in my heart, you are the daughter I never had. Be happy, my dear, be free. Be extraordinary, because you are." Tears streamed silently down Eleanor's face. "Alexander," Henry turned his eyes to his nephew, "forgive an old man for his manipulations, but I do not regret them. I saw in you two the possibility of something rare, a true partnership, mutual respect, perhaps even love. Take care of her as I could not. And let her take care of you. God knows you need it." Alexander didn't try to hide his own tears. "Uncle Henry, do not live for me," Henry interrupted, his voice growing weaker. "Live in spite of me. Choose each other freely, without guilt, without obligation. Just be happy. Promise me." "We promise," Eleanor whispered, squeezing Alexander's hand. Henry smiled, a smile of absolute peace, of a mission accomplished. "Good, then it is done." His eyes closed. "Caroline, I'm coming, my love. Wait for me." He fell asleep like that, Eleanor's and Alexander's hands still joined over his chest. His breathing grew slower, shallower. And at 17 minutes past 3 in the morning, on October 28th, 1815, in the soft candlelight, and with the two people he loved most by his side, Lord Henry Ashworth, Duke of Silvermere, passed away peacefully. Eleanor and Alexander remained like that for a long time, neither wanting to let go first, neither ready to face the world without Henry in it. Finally, Alexander stood, covered his uncle's face with a white linen sheet, and whispered a prayer. Eleanor kissed Henry's forehead one last time, murmuring thanks that no living ear was meant to hear. When they left the room together, the sun was beginning to rise. A new day, a new era. And though their hearts were heavy with grief, something else existed too, a profound gratitude for having known a man who had changed both their lives in ways impossible to quantify. The funeral was magnificent and somber. St. Michael's Chapel overflowed with the aristocracy of 3 counties, all dressed in strict black, all offering condolences that ranged from genuine to perfunctory. Eleanor stood beside Alexander throughout the ceremony, a black veil covering her face, her back straight despite the weight of grief. Victoria was on her other side, a silent but solid presence. Lord Pemberton attended, of course, with an expression that tried to look sad, but couldn't completely hide his greedy speculation. He watched Eleanor and Alexander with calculating eyes, clearly already planning his next legal move. The burial took place in the family cemetery in the gardens of Silvermere, where Caroline had already rested for 7 years. Henry's headstone would be simple, as he had requested. Henry Ashworth, Duke of Silvermere, 1737–1815. He loved well, lived with honor, and departed in peace. As the earth was thrown over the coffin, Eleanor felt something inside her both break and strengthen. Grief and liberation, sadness and gratitude, all mixed into an emotion too complex to name. The reading of the will took place a week later, at the offices of Morrison, Harrison and Associates in London. The room was all dark mahogany and law books, smelling of cigar smoke and old paper. Present were Eleanor, Alexander, Victoria, Lord Pemberton with 2 solicitors, several distant members of the Ashworth family, and Mr. Morrison himself, an elderly solicitor with white hair and sharp eyes that missed no detail. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, his voice carrying the authority of decades of practice, "we are here to execute the last will and testament of Lord Henry Ashworth, Duke of Silvermere, prepared on the 10th of June, 1815, and duly witnessed by 5 independent individuals." He opened the document and began to read. The initial provisions were expected: small sums for loyal servants, donations to charity, personal items for friends. Then he came to the main provisions. "To my beloved nephew, Dr. Alexander Ashworth, I bequeath the title of Duke of Silvermere with all entailed lands, totaling 12,000 acres, Silvermere Manor and all associated structures, the incomes derived from the dukedom, estimated at £8,000 annually, and the responsibility to uphold the legacy of the Ashworth family with honor and compassion." Alexander showed no surprise. He knew the title would come to him automatically. "To my beloved wife, Eleanor Hartley Ashworth, Duchess of Silvermere, I bequeath my personal fortune in government funds, totaling £200,000, Hartfield Manor in Derbyshire with all associated lands, the residence in Belgrave Square, London, all jewels not entailed to the ducal title, and a lifetime income of £6,000 annually." Murmurs ran through the room. It was a substantial fortune, but Morrison was not finished. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice growing stronger to override the chatter, "I name Lady Eleanor Ashworth as executor of all Silvermere estates for a period of 10 years, with the authority to make administrative decisions jointly with the new Duke. No sale of land, no major investment, no structural change in the administration of the estate may be undertaken without the joint approval of both parties. Absolute silence. Then Pemberton exploded. This is an outrage. A woman, a girl, with control over a ducal estate? It's preposterous. It is perfectly legal, Morrison cut in coldly. As you will see from the extensive documentation I have prepared, Lord Ashworth was in full possession of his mental faculties, as attested by 4 independent physicians over a period of 2 years. 47 witnesses can attest to his competence, and the provisions, while unusual, are entirely within his legal rights. I will contest this. Pemberton was red in the face. Undue influence, manipulation. Contest at your leisure, Morrison replied, entirely unflappable. But I must inform you of an additional clause. Any contestation of the will that fails will result in the entire personal fortune being donated to Oxford University. Lord Ashworth was very clear. His provisions will be met as written, or they will benefit education rather than greedy relatives. The silence that followed was scathing. Morrison continued reading. Minor provisions, detailed explanations, legal safeguards. But Eleanor was barely listening. Her mind was spinning, processing the implications. £200,000, properties, complete financial independence, and more, real power over Silvermere, a forced partnership with Alexander that ensured she would not be marginalized. Henry had not just saved her. He had given her the tools to shape her own future. When the reading was over, Pemberton stormed out, his solicitors trailing like oily shadows. Other relatives dispersed, muttering, some disgruntled, others curiously respectful. Eleanor, Alexander, and Victoria remained. Well, Victoria finally said, breaking the silence. Henry always did have a flair for the dramatic. Even from beyond the grave. Eleanor began to laugh, not hysterically, but with genuine relief. Alexander joined in, then Victoria, and for a moment they shared a lightness they hadn't felt in weeks. He tied us together, Alexander observed, looking at Eleanor. 10 years of joint decision-making, knowing full well that we would have to learn to work as partners, Eleanor finished. Not just colleagues, but true equals. It was always his plan, Victoria said softly, from the very first day, to give you security, Eleanor, and to give you, Alexander, a reason to stay at Silvermere instead of running off to your London clinics, to force you to build something together. The old manipulator, Alexander murmured, but there was deep affection in his voice. The wise old man, Eleanor corrected. The spring of 1816 arrived with an explosion of life. After months of winter mourning, the gardens of Silvermere awoke in a profusion of colour. Yellow daffodils, crimson tulips, cherry trees shedding petals like scented snow. Eleanor had changed visibly. She was no longer the frightened girl of a year ago. At 19, she moved with a confidence born of purpose. She dressed elegantly but practically, silks in vibrant shades, hair styled with modern simplicity. When she spoke, servants listened. When she made a decision, things happened. The official period of mourning had ended in March. Eleanor removed her black attire, but kept a discreet grey ribbon on her wrist, a private remembrance of the man who had changed everything. And Silvermere prospered under their joint administration. The school for tenants' children that Henry had mentioned became a reality. An old cottage was refurbished, transformed into a bright schoolroom where 40 children learned reading, writing, and basic arithmetic. Eleanor visited weekly, often teaching personally, delighting in the eager eyes of children hungry for knowledge. "You're a natural with them," Alexander observed, watching her explain fractions using apples. "Patient but firm." "Because I see myself in them," Eleanor replied. "A hunger to learn, hindered by circumstance. If I can change that for a few..." 15 tenants' cottages were repaired, roofs replaced, chimneys rebuilt, dirt floors covered with proper planks. Eleanor inspected each one personally, making lists of needs, allocating resources. "Her ladyship cares, Mrs. Millbrook," a farmer's wife said with tears in her eyes. "She doesn't just talk, she acts." The sewage system was modernized following Alexander's medical knowledge of sanitation. Cases of typhoid fever dropped dramatically. New farm machinery, a mechanical thresher, improved plows, increased productivity by 30%. And unlike greedy landlords, Eleanor and Alexander raised the workers' wages. "Increased productivity should benefit those who produce," Eleanor argued when the steward questioned it. "Not just the owners." Alexander's weekly medical clinic expanded. He provided his services for free, but Eleanor established a system where those who could contribute paid small amounts, not charity but fair payment for services. It restored dignity. They worked in perfect sync. What Eleanor saw with her heart, Alexander implemented with precision. What Alexander analyzed technically, Eleanor humanized. "We make a good team," he commented one night, reviewing their 6 months of achievements. "We do," Eleanor agreed, and then more quietly, "Henry knew we would." Their eyes met, laden with all that was unsaid. Eleanor's family was settled in a comfortable house in Bath. Eleanor visited monthly and maintained a weekly correspondence. Richard, surprisingly, had stopped gambling, or at least had dramatically reduced it. With a controlled allowance and the absence of London's temptations, he was better, not rehabilitated but functional. Sarah had regained her health and spirits. She tended a small garden, participated in a local charity society. When she hugged Eleanor during a visit in March, she whispered, "You saved us all." My extraordinary girl, Charlotte, now 14, was studying with a private tutor. She read Latin, studied history, and played the pianoforte. She had a future that had been unthinkable a year ago. Grace, at 8, was wild and happy. Dance lessons, French, horse riding. When Eleanor visited, she would run and jump into her arms, shouting stories about everything she had learned. "You did this," Alexander said, watching the scene during a joint visit. "You gave them a future." "Henry did this," Eleanor corrected. "I just ensured it wasn't wasted." Local society had gradually accepted Eleanor. Initially, there had been scandal. An 18-year-old duchess who had married a man 60 years her senior. Obscene. But Eleanor's irreproachable behavior, the genuine work she did and the respect she inspired slowly changed opinions. "Lady Eleanor is a reformer," Lady Pemberton, no relation to the odious lord thankfully, commented at a tea. "She doesn't just play at charity. She actually changes lives." Invitations began to arrive, dinners, balls, social events. Eleanor accepted selectively, always accompanied by Victoria or Alexander, always behaving impeccably. During a ball in May, Eleanor danced a waltz with Alexander for the first time. Strauss's music filled the ballroom. Candles multiplied in mirrors, creating a galaxy of light. "You've learned to dance," Alexander observed, guiding her smoothly. Victoria insisted. "She said a duchess who stumbles is gossip for months." He laughed, a rare, rich sound that made something flutter in Eleanor's chest. "I'm glad you learned," he said more quietly. "It's pleasant." "It is," Eleanor agreed, aware of how perfectly they fit together, of how his hand on her back burned even through layers of silk and gloves. When the music ended, they stood still for a moment longer than necessary. Then someone coughed discreetly. Reality intruded and they separated. But something had changed. An invisible line had been crossed, and they both knew it. One late April afternoon, Eleanor was in the rose garden that Henry had loved so much. The air was heavy with the scent of hundreds of blooming flowers. Deep crimson, delicate pink, pure white, buttery yellow. Bees hummed lazily. Butterflies danced among the petals. She wore a lavender muslin dress, her hair loosely pinned, a few curls escaping to frame her face. She looked young, she was young, only 19, but there was a timelessness in her posture, in the way she touched a rose petal as if it were precious. "I knew I would find you here," Eleanor turned. Alexander was approaching down the gravel path, dressed informally for him. No coat, sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled by the wind. His grey-blue eyes reflected the afternoon sky. "It's where I feel closest to him," Eleanor admitted. "Henry loved these roses. He said Caroline planted them, that each flower carried a piece of her soul. He would be proud," Alexander said, stopping beside her, "of everything you've built, of who you've become. Everything we've built together." Eleanor, her name on his lips sounded different, charged, intense. "I need to say something, and you can stop me. You can tell me it's too soon, that it's inappropriate, but I can't go on without saying it." She turned fully to face him, her heart quickening. Alexander took a deep breath, as if preparing for a delicate surgery. "Last June, when I first saw you, I thought you were a fortune hunter. I was so wrong it's almost funny now. It took one night, a single night saving Henry together, for me to begin to see who you really are." He took a step closer. "You are stronger than anyone I have ever met, smarter than most of the men at Oxford, more compassionate than the saints the church canonizes. You face injustice without flinching. You debate investments with an understanding I studied years to develop. You treat tenants with a dignity the aristocracy rarely shows." Another step. "You made my uncle happy when no one else could. You gave him purpose in his final months. And for me," he paused, his voice growing hoarse, "you made me question everything I believed about myself, about the world, about what is possible when two people work together." He was standing before her now, so close Eleanor could see the golden flecks in his grey eyes. could count each eyelash. I love you, Eleanor Hartley Ashworth, not out of obligation to my uncle, not for convenience, not because managing Silvermere together makes practical sense, though it does, but because when I wake up in the morning, my first thought is, will she walk in the gardens today? Because when I read something interesting, I want to share it with you before anyone else. Because your laugh makes dark days seem bright. Because I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Eleanor couldn't breathe. Her heart was beating so hard he could surely hear it. I know the official mourning period is over, but society would still expect us to wait longer. I know you may not feel the same. I have been brusque, often arrogant. I said terrible things when we first met. But when the time is right, if you will have me, I would kneel now and ask for your hand. He took her hands, lacing his fingers through hers. Not to control you, not to gain access to your fortune, I have my own. Not to lock you into the role of an ornamental wife, but because I want to build a life with you, a true partnership, where we make decisions together, where we debate and disagree and find solutions, where you pursue your interests, medicine, education, social reform, and I support you every step of the way. Alexander, Eleanor tried to speak, but he continued, the words pouring out like a broken dam. I love how you are never intimidated by my arrogance. I love how you correct my mistakes without cruelty. I love your intelligence that challenges mine. I love your compassion that humanizes my technical precision. I love how you make me want to be a better man. He finally stopped, breathing heavily, vulnerable in a way Eleanor had never seen. Silence fell, broken only by the distant song of a nightingale and the whisper of a breeze through the roses. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice trembling but firm. When you walked into that breakfast room in June, I thought you were a monster. Arrogant, cruel, judgmental. It took me months to see past the anger. She squeezed his hands. But when I finally did, I saw a man who carries the pain of war, but still chooses to heal. I saw someone who loves his uncle so deeply that he lashed out at a perceived threat. I saw a brilliant doctor who treats poor farmers with the same respect as dukes. I saw a partner who values my opinions, who debates with me as an equal, who has never tried to diminish my intelligence or my ambitions. Tears began to stream, but she was smiling. I love you too, Alexander Ashworth. I think I started that night we saved Henry together, when you could have dismissed me but chose to truly see me. I love how you challenge my thoughts, how you aren't afraid to disagree, how you make me sharper just by trying to keep up with you. I love how you care so deeply but hide it under pragmatism. I love your rare smiles that transform your entire face. She touched his cheek softly. Yes, when the proper time has passed, when society no longer has cause for cruel gossip, I will marry you. For love, only for... Because I cannot imagine a future without you either. For a moment, Alexander just stared, as if he couldn't believe it. Then slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward. The kiss was gentle at first, questioning, reverent, as if she were precious crystal he might break. But when Eleanor responded, deepening it, twining her fingers in his hair, something shifted. It became urgent, passionate, a year of suppressed tension finally released. When they broke apart, they were both breathless, faces flushed, smiling like fools. Henry would be unbearably smug, Eleanor said, laughing through happy tears. He is, Alexander agreed, wherever he is, probably arranging our celestial celebration. They stood like that as the sun went down, painting the garden in gold and rose, enveloped by the scent of the roses that Caroline had planted and Henry had loved, and that now witnessed a new beginning. We will wait 6 months, Eleanor said practically. October, a year after Henry's passing. Then no one can accuse us of indecency. October, Alexander agreed. It feels like an eternity. But we will have a lifetime afterward. Eleanor leaned against him, feeling a deep sense of peace. A life we choose. Not arranged, not forced. Ours. And in that fragrant garden, under a sky turning purple, 2 survivors of impossible circumstances allowed themselves to believe in happy endings. The Ashworth family cemetery, late afternoon in October 1816. The sun was setting slowly, painting the marble headstones in shades of gold and honey. Autumn leaves, crimson, amber, bronze, danced lazily through the air which smelled of earth and chrysanthemums. Eleanor walked alone as she did weekly since Henry's death. She wore a forest green silk dress, a wool shawl over her shoulders against the cool October breeze. Her hair was in coiled braids, a few wisps escaping to kiss her cheek. She stopped before the grey granite headstone, simple but elegant, exactly as Henry had asked. Beside it was Caroline's, together again as they were always meant to be. Eleanor knelt, placed a bouquet of white roses, his favourites, in the bronze holder at the foot of the stone. She touched the engraved letters softly, her fingers tracing his name. "Hello, Henry," she whispered as she always did. She talked to him there, finding comfort in speaking aloud even though she knew there would be no reply. "I've come to tell you the week's news." A breeze blew, making the leaves whisper. Eleanor smiled faintly. "The school has 60 children now. We need to add a second room. Little Emma, the one you mentioned, the blacksmith's daughter, is reading Shakespeare." "Shakespeare, Henry. At 9 years old. You would be so proud." She paused, arranging a petal the wind had displaced. "Alexander's clinic treated 200 patients this month. We saved 3 children from scarlet fever. And the sanitation system. Well, fever cases are down 70%. You were right about investing in infrastructure. You were always right." Another silence. A nightingale sang from a nearby tree. "My family is well. Charlotte wants to study at a young ladies' school in London. I can imagine your approval. Grace is learning botany, fascinated by plants. Mother is happy. Even father is better. Not perfect, he never will be, but functional." She took a deep breath, getting to what she had really come to say. "Alexander asked me to marry him, officially with a ring and everything. He knelt in the rose garden, your roses, Henry, and told me he loved me. And I said yes." Her voice broke slightly. "You were right. About him, about me, about what we could be together. You were right about everything, you wonderful old manipulator. We were pieces in your chess game, but it was a game played with love, to give us a chance to be happy." Tears were flowing now, but she was smiling. "I'm going to marry him in 2 weeks. In the chapel where I married you. And I know it's not a betrayal because you planned this. You wanted this. You gave us to each other as much as you gave us anything material." She touched the headstone again, as if she could reach through the cold stone to touch the man who rested beyond. "I was a frightened girl when you brought me to Silvermere, sold desperate with no future. And you saw me. You didn't see a commodity. You didn't see a transaction. You saw a person capable of more, of better, of being extraordinary. You gave me an education, confidence, resources, but more than anything you gave me a sense of self-worth." Her voice grew steadier, stronger. "That wedding night when you revealed the truth, that the marriage was nominal, that you were dying, that you had chosen me not for beauty or youth, but for a kindness you had seen in me, that was my true beginning. Not the end of my freedom, but the start. You didn't buy me. You freed me." She looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "And now I will write the rest of my story. Not as a victim who was saved, not as a wife who existed to serve, but as myself, Eleanor Ashworth, who also happens to be a duchess. A woman who manages estates, who teaches children, who debates politics, who studies medicine, who chooses her own path." She rose slowly, wiping her tears. "And I will do it with Alexander by my side. By choice, for love, for the partnership you saw before we did. We will make you proud, Henry, I promise you that." She kissed her fingertips, touched the headstone one last time. "Rest in peace with your Caroline. You two gave each other love for 40 years. You gave me the possibility of doing the same. It's an extraordinary legacy." She turned to leave, then stopped, looking back one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. For believing in me. For saving me. For teaching me that strength can come from unlikely places. For showing me that kindness has a power all its own. For being the father mine never was. For everything." She began to walk back towards Silvermere Manor, visible in the distance against the twilight sky. Lights were beginning to appear in the windows, like earthbound stars answering the celestial ones. And there, standing on the veranda, waiting as he always waited now, was Alexander. When he saw her, he smiled, a smile that transformed his serious face into something luminous, and began to walk toward her. They met halfway as they always would, not him coming to save her, not her depending on him, but both of them walking toward each other, meeting as equals. "Talking to him?" Alexander asked softly, lacing his fingers through hers. "Always, and I always will." Eleanor looked back at the cemetery where 2 lovers from another era rested together. "He is part of who I have become. I will never forget that. Nor should you." Alexander kissed her forehead. "He gave us to each other. It is a debt we will repay by living well, loving well, and being happy. It's what he wanted most." They walked back to the manor. Together, their steps perfectly synchronized, their silhouettes merging as darkness fell. 2 years later, spring of 1818, Eleanor stood in the gardens of Silvermere, watching Charlotte play with little Henrietta, Eleanor and Alexander's daughter, a year and a half old, named in honor of Henry. The little girl had her father's grey-blue eyes and her mother's luminous smile, laughing as she tried to chase butterflies. The school now had 100 children. A hospital wing had been built where Alexander was training 2 young men in medicine. Eleanor had published an article in a London newspaper on estate reform, causing a sensation. "A penny for your thoughts," Victoria said, sitting beside her on the bench. "Thinking about how much has changed," Eleanor replied. 3 years ago, I was terrified, sold, without hope. Now you are more powerful than most men in 3 counties, Victoria finished dryly. Effective duchess, social reformer, mother, wife to the current duke, and I dare say, happy. So happy it's sometimes frightening, Eleanor admitted. As if it might evaporate if I let myself fully believe it. It won't evaporate. Victoria squeezed her hand. You built this, every piece of it, with intelligence, hard work, and that stubborn kindness Henry saw from the very beginning. Alexander emerged from the manor carrying documents, but stopped when he saw his family in the gardens. He watched for a moment, his wife, his daughter, Eleanor's visiting sisters, Victoria, and felt a profound gratitude. Eleanor looked up, caught his eye, and smiled. And in that smile was everything. Love, partnership, the future they were building together. She often thought of the girl she had been. Eleanor Hartley, 18, terrified but keeping her back straight as she walked down the stairs to meet her fate. That girl had been brave without knowing it. She had been strong without believing it. She had been extraordinary without realizing it. And now, Eleanor Ashworth understood. Strength doesn't come from never falling. It comes from getting up. Dignity doesn't come from perfect circumstances. It comes from holding on to your values, even when the world tries to tear them down. And love, true love, doesn't come from fairy tales. It comes from daily choices, mutual respect, a partnership built stone by stone. Henry had given her the foundation, but she had built the house, and it was a magnificent house full of love and purpose and infinite possibility. The sun set over Silvermere, tinting the ancient stone with gold and rose. In the cemetery, the wind blew softly over 2 headstones, side by side, and if one were listening very carefully, they might have sworn they heard a soft laugh, 2 voices intertwined, happy and proud of the legacy they had left behind. Because in the end, love doesn't die. It just transforms, passes on, perpetuating itself in new and wonderful ways. And that is the greatest magic of all.